Ryan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Attorney-General. Will the Attorney-General please update the House on the importance of strong and consistent border protection measures, and is the Attorney-General aware of alternative approaches that will put Australia's strong borders at risk?
The Attorney-General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And the member is very well aware that this government has turned back 33 boats, resulting in over 800 people being returned. On top of that, more than 2,500 people have been prevented from boarding leaky, dangerous vessels run by people smugglers, which would have otherwise have been bound for Australia. In total, Operation Sovereign Borders has disrupted 80 ventures and stopped more than 3,300 people arriving in Australia unlawfully. Preventing people from getting on those boats prevents men and women and children drowning at sea. It is as simple as that. The fact is that the alternative was probably the greatest public policy failure in Australia's history. Under members opposite, 50,000 people arrived on over 800 boats, 8,000 children went into detention, and 1,200 men, women and children drowned at sea. Our approach, which was designed by the Prime Minister, which we have held fast to for 5 years, which has stopped the boats and saved the lives, has always had as a central pillar the commitment to offshore processing. There is now, which we are all aware, a bill in the Senate designed to weaken that central pillar of our successful border protection policy. And I'd like to say two things to all members present with respect to that bill. The first is that people are already transferred to Australia where that is medically necessary and appropriate. That already happens. The practical effect of the legislation before the Senate is to achieve nothing more than weakening our borders and sending precisely the wrong message to the people smugglers and their potential victims, which causes the loss of life at sea. The second thing that I'd like to say with respect to it, Mr Speaker, is that as Attorney-General and Acting Home Affairs Minister, I've offered briefings at the absolute highest level to all members of the crossbench, and I would like to thank those crossbench members who have accepted those briefings, even when their ultimate view might differ from that of the government. But I must say that members who would appear to commit to support a position which would weaken our borders on an issue as critical as this and not accept those briefings, not hear from the people who understand all of the dimensions of this tragic problem, not hear from the people who can say with authority, because they have been on the coalface of this problem, what the outcome of that bill in the Senate might mean, that they would not hear from those people is unbelievably unwise. And I think actually their electorates deserve better than that. They must hear from the experts before they make that.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to my last question and the subsequent answer. If the government legislation prohibits the privatisation of state electricity assets, why is the amendment from the member for Kennedy even necessary? And further, why is it that privatisation will only be ruled out for the time being because the member for Kennedy is now writing government energy policy?
The Leader of the House. The Treasurer has the call.
The real question is, why doesn't the Leader of the Opposition stand up for the consumers of Queensland, Mr Speaker? Why doesn't the Leader of the Opposition stand with us and the member for Kennedy and other members of the crossbench for this amendment, which will make it absolutely abundantly clear that when there is when there is an asset that is divested, that it cannot be privatised, Mr Speaker? And why doesn't the Leader of the Opposition stand up for the blue-collar workers he said that he represents in the Tomago aluminium smelter, across the paper manufacturers and the like? Mr Speaker, there are lots of questions, and those questions are to the Leader of the Opposition. He needs to stand up for energy consumers.
Has the Treasurer concluded his answer? Treasurer's concluded his answer. The member for Groom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on why the government's strong border security policies have been so successful? Is the Minister aware of any threats to the government's successful border security policies?
The Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that this government stopped the boats. We know that this government has closed 17 detention centres that were opened by those opposite. We know that this government has got 2,000 kids out of detention who are forcibly placed there by those opposite. And we know now that they want radical change to Australia's system of offshore processing and resettlement. We also know that what they propose is not about children, Mr Speaker. There are 10 children on Nauru, 4 of whom will shortly resettle in the United States, leaving 6 children in Nauru. We know that it's not about medical transfers, Mr Speaker, because there is a process in place in relation to medical transfers, and it does allow third country resettlement, and that has a third country transfer for medical attention on a temporary basis, and that has occurred more than 200 times in relation to children. What it's about, what the opposition and the Greens propose, is about ending regional processing and resettlement. That is fundamentally what it's about. Last time that happened, Mr Speaker, 50,000 people arrived unlawfully by sea, 1,200 people drowned at sea, including children. We'll never know how many, but we know that children drowned under the policies of those opposite. Today they go further with this bill that is proposed, Mr Speaker, which fundamentally will end regional processing and resettlement. And it's very important that people understand how this bill operates. Under this bill, Mr Speaker, if a doctor in Nauru has assessed an individual and said that that person is either not sick or capable of being attended to in Nauru, that is irrelevant if 2 doctors in, say, Hobart via Skype say that person should come to Australia for assessment. It's not required that those doctors say that the person is sick. It is merely required that 2 clinicians anywhere in Australia say that that person should come to Australia for assessment, and it doesn't matter under this bill if the doctors in Nauru or Manus who have actually seen the person say that that is not appropriate or required. It is an absurd proposition, Mr Speaker. It will lead to the complete breakdown of Australia's system of offshore processing and resettlement, and it proves once again that the opposition fundamentally cannot be trusted on this issue. We know what happened last time.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How can the Prime Minister possibly expect Queenslanders to believe that he is not planning to force Queensland to privatise electricity assets when recommendation 2 of the government's own electricity report recommends that Queensland's state-owned power stations should be sold off?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, we've made it very clear we don't support the privatisation of the Queensland assets. And it's the Labor Party who seems to be voting against the member for Kennedy's amendment to an important bill in this House, which would exactly do that, Mr Speaker. So the ACCC has found that in Queensland, black coal generators has increased the price of some generation capacity despite no increase in fuel costs. This was likely due to a lack of competitive constraint and the highly concentrated market structure. The ACCC has found that the Queensland Government should take immediate steps to remedy the past overinvestment of their network businesses in order to improve affordability of the network. This would lead to savings for consumers of Queensland by $110 a year. And we know, Mr Speaker, that it was a Labor government back in Queensland in 2011, the Bligh government, that saw the consolidation of 3 businesses into 2 in the energy generation assets. And this concentration has elevated wholesale prices due to low competition, Mr Speaker. So if anyone has a case to answer for the high prices in Queensland, it's Labor governments past and present, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House have been seeing energy prices come down as a result of actions we have taken, and we on this side of the House have put into this place a piece of legislation to hold the energy companies to account. Unfortunately, it's the Leader of the Opposition who turns his back on this debate, who has turned his back on the Australian people.
The member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Can the Minister update the House on how the government is supporting the work of the Australian Defence Force with strong and consistent border protection policies? Can the Minister also tell the House what impact alternative approaches would have on the work of the ADF?